Hello and welcome to Topic 4 Iran. We're going to be talking about political institutions. All right, the first thing we'll talk about is linkage institutions. Again, the linkage institutions are not very strong in Iran. The Constitution does lay a foundation for their creation. Political parties have been part of the system, but only since 1997. They are very weak. They seem to come and go, and they're organized around personalities. There is not much staying power in the political parties. Again, they kind of form as we are coming up onto an election, and they can be really classified as two different types: those who have a conservative mindset and those who have a reformist mindset. A few parties still exist, even though their leadership is in exile. They're more dissident parties, but there still is some support for those in Iran, but again, it is very limited by the government. A good word to use when we talk about Iran is factionalism. Political parties are really split based on their views in terms of policy and also the personalities of their leadership. All right, elections in Iran. 18-year-old citizens can vote in elections for the Assembly of Religious Experts, members of the Majlis, and the office of the president. The president and the Majlis elections are winner take all, but again, if there is no majority, it can go to a second round of elections, so they have a double ballot. Just some general information about the last few elections. If we look at the Majlis going back in 2004, 2008, the conservatives have actually gained, during the 2000s, they gained influence, and the moderates actually declined. And this has a lot to do with the Guardian Council in the candidates that were up for election, the ones that they did not disqualify. The president election in 2005 had very low turnout, and it took 2 rounds for Ahmadinejad, who's definitely conservative, to win. So throughout the 2000s, we do see a move in Iran to the more conservative side of the spectrum. The 2009 presidential election we'll highlight here, and we'll talk about this in class. There was a huge outcry and a huge push for Mousavi, the candidate, to defeat Ahmadinejad. Again, huge turnout, which is not the case back in the 2005 election, about 85%. Large allegations of fraud. Mousavi urged supporters to the streets to protest the decision that Ahmadinejad had won the election. The Supreme Leader Khamenei agreed to the investigation, but it was quickly wrapped up, and Ahmadinejad was named the winner. This led to some huge protests, the largest since the revolution of 1979, and then a very large government crackdown. Again, this is one of the Green Revolution, the Green Riots, and green was the color of the Mousavi campaign. So a lot of turmoil there in 2009. We'll talk more about that in class. The 2013 presidential election, which just took place, very surprising. Rouhani, the current president, won, and it was a real surprise that he was able to win the presidency. He was not connected to the Supreme Leader or the former president Ahmadinejad. All right, interest groups are also very weak. Workers' House is probably the most prominent of the interest groups, and it's an interest group that represents factory workers. So again, it's more like a labor union. It is very reform-minded, but in all instances, the government has cracked down upon any real protest or strikes. There are a few business interest groups in Iran. The Iranian government still, even today, controls about 65 to 80% of the economy, so we really haven't had much opportunity for those interest groups to form. So as you can see, civil society is very weak in Iran. We have a weak party system, we have weak linkage institutions, and the elections, again, very questionable. Most of them we can point to as free and fair, but again, the 2009 election is one we can seriously consider to not be so free and fair. All right, so the mass media, again, speech against the government was actually a criminal offense back when the new government came into power in 1979. Some of those restrictions have been lifted and weakened over time, but it still is a huge issue of access to the media between those conservatives and the reformists and what's going to be presented on them. All of the major radio and television is government run by the Islamic Republic of Iran Broadcasting. There are some privately owned newspapers and magazines. There's not a lot of political content in those. And again, the Iranians are very educated. They have a very robust college and university system. So you do see a lot of scholarly work, but not a lot of political discussion in those magazines and newspapers. All right, so let's jump into government institutions. All right, Iran is a unitary state. It's a unitary state that is divided up for administrative means into provinces, districts, sub-districts, and then villages and local areas. Local elections are permitted at the local levels by the Constitution, so we do have local elections at the province, district, and local areas. These were started back in 1999. The government structure in Iran is very complex, and the key and organizing idea for you to remember is the fact that it's a blend of theocracy or theocratic ideals with democratic ideals also. All right, so the other kind of unifying principle here is called jurist guardianship. All right, and that's the idea that the religious leadership is taking the responsibility for pretty much for the society. The supreme leader, the guardian council, the assembly of religious experts really don't fit into a normal arrangement of government institutions like the ones that we've studied up to this point, because they are the religious component of the Iranian system, and they supersede all of the other positions and bodies inside the Iranian system. They all abide by this concept of the jurist guardianship. Again, that they have the encompassing authority over all of the members of the community because they have the ability to understand Sharia law, and they are committed to being a champion of the rights of the people. So again, this is that grounding in religion, that these religious-oriented bodies have the ability to interpret religious law, Islamic law, and they know what's best for the entire community. All right, so let's talk about the very pinnacle of the Iranian system, the supreme leader. He's the imam of the community, so he's the top religious leader. Again, this is a lifetime position. He links the three branches of government together, and some of his powers, as you can see here on the slide, again, he holds ultimate power in Iran, limiting presidential candidates. He has the power to dismiss the president. He commands the armed forces. He appoints and removes major administrators and judges. He has the power to name half of the Guardian Council, and he appoints many of the other directors of other elements of Iranian society, like the bureaucrat that runs all of the national radio and television network. That's somebody that the Supreme Leader appoints. Working with the Supreme Leader is a group or a panel of 12 male clerics. 6 are approved by the Majlis, and 6 are picked by the Supreme Leader. So he controls half of this Guardian Council. This Guardian Council reviews all of the bills that are passed by the Majlis, so this is the religious check on the legislature. They decide who competes in elections, so they basically set the table in terms of who is running for offices, and they will disqualify hundreds, up to thousands of different candidates. So you could see here how conservative viewpoints could lead to the disqualification of moderate candidates. In 2012-2013, they disqualified thousands for the Majlis and the presidential election, so they are very active. And their job is to ensure that the democratic body always adhere to Islamic law. So they're kind of the watch or the check on the Majlis. The Assembly of Religious Experts is, again, another all-male panel or group. There's 86 of them, and they're directly elected every 4 years. They have a lot of constitutional power in terms of interpreting the Constitution. They were responsible for electing the new Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, after the death of Ruhollah Khomeini. They're mostly clerics. Again, they started off originally as all clerics, but today there's been a little bit of flexibility. They're mostly clerics. And probably the notable point here is that the former president, Rafsanjani, who was a reformer, was in charge of this body until 2011. All right, the Expediency Council is a council that is appointed by the Supreme Leader. It was created as a mediator between the Guardian Council and the Majlis, so it's kind of like the go-between between the theocracy and the actual legislative body, the democratic organism in Iran. It started with 13 clerics and now has 32 members, and again, they're not all clerics. Much more power than its original form. Again, this was created back during the by Khomeini to mediate between those two parts of the system. It's got a lot more power today. It can make its own legislation, and it really is, when you look at those 32 men, the most powerful men in Iran. All right, so now we move into the other part of the Iranian system. We have the president and the cabinet. The president is the chief executive and the highest official next to the supreme leader, but he doesn't really have much power. He is directly elected every 4 years, and there's a 2-term limit on that. And he must be a pious Shiite who will uphold Islamic principle. Almost all of the presidents have been clerics, all of them except 2, and Ahmadinejad was one of the 2. You can see there the president is responsible for making the budget. He supervises the economy, executing policy. Again, even though they don't have a presidential system in Iran, the functions of the president are very similar. All right, cabinet really does most of the actual work. The president isn't really working on the budget. He has officials inside the cabinet. They're going to work on those. Traditionally, the supreme leader and the president have worked really hand in hand together. We did notice, or there was competition for power between Ahmadinejad and the current supreme leader Ali Khamenei. They became kind of public wrestling matches over the naming of different officials. Ahmadinejad actually left the presidency for a while. It was really a very strange situation. All right, one of the other things that we'll talk about when we talk about Iran are banyads. All right, these banyads are charitable organizations, and they're autonomous. They're not controlled by the government, but they are directed by friends of the supreme leader. They're tax-exempt charities. They control large amounts of money, cash, all right, money that they have access to at all times. They were originally created they were originally royal foundations established by the Shah. And after the fall of the Shah, they were then morphed into these charitable foundations, and they're the New Republic. Again, a couple of names here: Foundation of the Oppressed and Disabled, and the Martyrs Foundation. The original intent was that they were supposed to distribute income to the poor and families of martyrs, people who had died in service to the Republic. There are about 100 of them today. They don't really have any direct supervision, so no one really knows how much they have or how much they actually give, but they have been connected to funneling resources to terrorist groups around the world, the insurgency in Iraq, Hamas. We've also noted that they do have an impact on Iran dealing with sanctions. The access to cash has given them the ability to this kind of charitable organization has been exempt, and it's one of the ways that the Iranians have helped to survive through those sanctions. The Majlis, we've mentioned a bunch up to this point. It's a unicameral legislature. It's directly elected, 290 seats. They are a single-member district, and they are winner-take-all. It was first created way back in 1916 in that original democratic constitution, and they were retained during the Islamic Republic. You can see their powers there. Again, the power of the Majlis has been limited. It is an entity, but it is limited. You'll notice they enact or change laws with the approval of the Guardian Council. They can interpret legislation. They can investigate members of the president's cabinet, remove cabinet ministers, and they also approve the budget. The judiciary is interesting in Iran that they're split with Sharia and common or normal law. It's headed by a chief justice who is appointed by the supreme leader for a 5-year term. They do have a Supreme Court, which is the highest court of appeal in the land. And again, jurist guardianship, the idea that the supreme leader, the Guardian Council, is going to look out for the needs of the entire society. That's really kind of the end point, end-to-end start point for the judiciary in Iran. All right, we have Sharia law and what's called quantum law, which is the law passed by the Majlis. We have religious law, and we have institutional laws passed by the legislature. Laws passed by the legislature cannot contradict Sharia. Judicial review does exist in Iran, but again, it is that review that makes sure that it doesn't conflict with religious law. The Republic has kept the court structure that was in place under the Shah with the appeal system and the local level courts. They do have, in terms of the structure of courts, a system in place. It's just a matter of this interpretation of the two different types of law. And again, it is a very strict interpretation of Sharia law. They are users of the death penalty. There is no interest charges on loans. That's another little limit there on things that happen. The military, also very prominent. Again, the Revolutionary Guards were formed after the revolution. They created 2 parallel militaries, one to protect the regime and the other to protect the country. The Basiji is a paramilitary group. Thanks for watching.